If you have ever been intimidated by painting, then this video is for you. If you're a beginner to the tabletop crafting and terrain hobby, then welcome to this wonderful world. This video is also for you. And if you're someone who just likes to watch a weird little guy do things, then you're also in the perfect place. Because with 4 cheap paints and 3 easy steps, we will transform our built and detailed miniature terrain into something beautiful. Hello there, my friends. My name is Selrahc. I never painted a piece of terrain until spring of 2020. My whole life, I was intimidated and struggled and just didn't know what to do or how or why to do it, to turn my terrain from bare cardboard into something that looked beautiful on the tabletop. So today, I wanted to share the 3 easy steps that I use as a beginner to get some beautiful results when it comes to painting my terrain. We're going to start with a piece of terrain I made just for funsies, a cardboard medieval fantasy house. We've already finished the build and detail stages of my terrain crafting process, including it being primed and sealed black and dry brushed with white to show all the little details. We're going to use a very limited palette of only 4 colors today, because I want to show that you don't need a lot of different colors and different paints to get some good results. These colors are actually remarkably similar to what's known as the Zorn palette, named after Swedish painter Andres Zorn. He painted portraits of many people, including many prominent people of the time, and it is believed that he used these 4 colors to achieve amazing results. I never got to meet him because I spent the years of his life living in the Far East, but I've always found it inspirational because I strongly believe it's much more about your techniques and your creativity than about the specific tools and materials you have to use. And so aside from our paints, we'll need a little water and a couple of brushes. For step 1 of our process, we're going to put down base colors. And with our white and our black, we're going to start by mixing a lightish, mediumish gray and use this on the stonework. If you've seen either of my last 2 videos, you might have noticed that I've started a new technique whereby I paint with very, very thinned down acrylic paints, very watery. The reason for this is that it lets the work we did with our priming and highlighting, priming it in black and then highlighting it with a white dry brush, it lets that do a lot of the heavy lifting for our textures. Because once this dries, it will be strongly affected by the color, the shade underneath it. So the darker parts will stay dark, the lighter parts will be lighter, the medium parts will be medium. It gives us almost a shade, a highlight, and a base color all in one step. And as a beginner, this makes your life a lot easier. In my very first video where we built a little cardboard shack, I applied my paint pretty thickly because I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just giving it a try. And the results were okay, but I think they're a lot better now with the new techniques I'm using. And if I knew then what I knew now, I wouldn't have dreaded painting so much, because I was really intimidated by it then. I was worried that it already looked pretty good after the detailing, the priming stage. I was worried that I would ruin it with my painting, that I'd leave it just looking all flat and ugly, and that it would drown out the details. And while I could see in my head how I wanted things to turn out, how I wanted it to look, I didn't know how to make that a reality. But I do now, and it feels so liberating. It makes painting my models, my terrain pieces, and other crafts, it makes painting it a complete joy. Taking it on that final step in the crafting process, make something really cool to have on your tabletop, something you can be proud of, something that people see and be like, whoa, I want to play some games with this weird little guy. I wanted to differentiate the roof color from the stonework, so I mixed in a little black for a slightly darker gray. A lot of people like to paint their walls a plain whitish color and then make their roofs colorful. I like to paint the roofs darker and more foreboding, and then paint the walls in a more brighter, more playful color. To start painting the wood, we'll take some of our brown paint and thin it down just the same as we did with our gray. And then I'm going to paint it on the little shed attachment and the windows and the doors. For a little variation, I want to have two colors of wood, a slightly lighter and a slightly darker. So we'll use just our plain brown paint to paint the windows, the door, the little shed, and then we can mix our brown with a little bit of black to get a darker brown to paint on all the support timbers that frame the house and give it its distinctive medieval fantasy look. This dark brown is great because if we get any of it on the other parts of the build, not on the wood, then it won't really matter because we'll be able to cover it up very easily when we add a little more emphasis with dark wash in the third step. Most of the things I build tend to look pretty neglected, and so a little bit of brown undertones somewhere else, that can just look like a bit of water damage, a bit of mold, adds a little more atmosphere, and removes any pressure on you to be perfect. When you've done all the work that we have with the texturing and detail stage, the painting stage is really almost like a paint by the number. You paint the wood parts wood, you paint the wall parts whatever wall color you want, paint the stone parts stone. For our walls, I wanted to start with a darker red and then build it up with just one more step into a brighter red. So I mixed a little bit of the black and our red together to make sort of a burgundy, maybe a maroon, maybe more of a burgundy kind of color. In other words, a dark red. And just like all our other base colors, we thin it down with water and then apply it on our model. I always start by trying it on just one piece of the wall as a little test to see how it looks. And then if you like it, you can continue on with the rest of it. Now, one easy way to make our medieval fantasy style walls look good is to have a gradient. That is sort of like a shift in the shades of your color. And so from the outside edges where it meets the wood, we want it to be darker, and in the middle we want it to be brighter. So what I do is after the first layer has dried, I'll put on a second coat of this same thinned down base color and just sort of swirl it around just the middle of the panels just to add a little more emphasis, as if it's been maintained but poorly maintained by some slumlord trying to throw just a little coat of paint on it but not really do a very good job. Most of what I make tends to be ruined terrain because I guess something about it speaks to me. But even when making something intact, I like it to still be not perfect, not pristine, sort of haphazardly maintained. It not only looks good, but it tells more of a story that way, about the people who inhabit it, the people who own it, little subtle details. In step 2, dry brush highlights. We're going to use a lighter version of each of our colors in turn and use them to add highlights by loading the brush up with paint and then removing most of it by brushing it on a paper towel or a piece of cardboard. We're not trying to get total coverage of the things that we did. So with our light brown, we're going to use a tan, and we're going to try to especially get the edges. If you've got a little too much paint on your brush, something like that'll happen. You can usually sort of scrape it off and start over. But we're hoping to get the edges and the details, and it can look really good. It can add a whole nother layer of depth and dimension to your colors, especially with things like the wood grains on the shed and other wood details. And so the important point here is whatever color you used for your base color, we want to use a lighter version of it to highlight. And that's why we do the dry brush, because it's a light-handed technique, and it will hopefully focus on and add more detail, more color to the raised parts, the textures, everything else that we worked on. For our dark red, the base coat for our walls, we can just use our regular red. As you saw for the lighter wood parts, we used a tan. by mixing some of our regular brown paint with a little bit of white. And as I said, we're not trying to cover every bit of it with this highlight color. We're trying to add a gradient from darker to lighter, whereby it looks like the outside edges, where it meets the wood and the stone and other textures, haven't been cared for as well. It adds more of a dark fantasy look to it, I think, which is exactly how I want things to look on my tabletop. I want there to be a hint of rotting and decay, of mold, negligence. And just like with the wall panels, we used a darker red as our base color and a regular red as the highlight. For our wood timber frames, we used a darker brown as the base, so we can use our regular brown as our highlight that we're going to dry brush on. And in particular, I'm a big fan of doing this unevenly. It gives, I think it gives a more natural look to things. Not that I shoot for realism really in what I do, but very rarely will things be all the same color, just all throughout. After you've done all of the wood timber frames and everything else, I just took our white and very lightly highlighted our stone parts with it. You can see how we're only picking out like the edges of the texture, the raised parts. And then we can just do the same for our roof. I think I used white again instead of mixing another light gray because I'm kind of lazy sometimes, and if I've already got white on the brush and I think, yeah, that'll probably work. Okay, now in our final stage, we're going to add a little bit more detail using dark wash. And what I do is I just take our brown paint and thin it down even just a little bit more than we thinned it down when we were painting the base color on the wood with it. What I like to do with this is sort of spread it around places where textures meet. And then anywhere you want to add emphasis of like a little dirt, water dripping, a little mud maybe. So I like to put it around the base, and then I like to put it, like I said, where the different textures meet, where the stone meets the wood, where the stone and wood both meet the wall panels. And this is almost sort of like outlining. It adds emphasis to what's in between the places where you put it. So I especially like to do it on the cracks in the stonework also, because then it emphasizes the individual stones themselves. Because it's so thin, it's almost transparent. In fact, it might actually be transparent. And so the little subtle color variations it gives can look really good. Like instead of the stone being all gray all the way through, now we've got bits of dark gray, light gray, white, and brownish gray. I like to do this in a two-step process, starting with brown and applying it anywhere you'd like, and then doing the same with an extremely thinned down black, putting it on top of the places you put the brown, except even lighter handed, because this is one where it can really go overboard and just darken everything. But the black is especially good if you do want to indicate water damage, if you really want to draw attention to what's in between it. Like it's the perfect thing to add on top of the brown wash when you're highlighting the cracks in the stones where the different textures meet. And it really ties everything together, all the different colors, the different textures. It puts like the final bit of emphasis on our wall panel color gradient and just makes everything look grimy, dingy, a little bit desperate, and gives your buildings a feeling of hopelessness in everyday life that hopefully your heroes or villains, whoever you're playing with, can come across and change in some way or another. I forgot to put brown wash on the roof, but it should be fine with just black. I was a little unsatisfied with it when I was doing these horizontal strokes, but once I started doing a vertical, up and down, kind of streaky look to it, I really liked how that was turning out. It looked like it had been, just as neglected as the rest of the building. Finally, for anything involving fire, whether it's fire damage and burnt parts, or the smoke from a chimney, I like to take a black dry brush to finish our piece. That is it, my friends. My hope with this video is that it removes some of the intimidation factor when it comes to painting your terrain. Personally, I'm still pretty intimidated by painting my miniatures, but I love painting terrain now. I've found ways that make it so easy, so simple, and so accessible. Like I said, I never did any painting of terrain, or really anything whatsoever, until a couple years ago. And now I'm no expert. I still think of myself as very much a beginner, but I really enjoy the process, and I really love the results I get. And that's what I hope for you too, my friends, that you'll paint things and you'll love how it turns out, and you'll just want to paint more and then craft more. That way you have more things to paint. As I said before, I made this house just for fun, but if anyone would like to see a how to build, how to detail video, let me know. If you have any questions, any comments, if you want to share anything about your painting journey, I would love to hear it. Especially if you have any tips for beginners or anything like that as well. Feel free to leave anything below in the comments. And if you ever have anything you want to share with me, you can find my Instagram linked in the description as well. You can always message or tag me there. Aside from more terrain videos, I've got videos about miniatures coming up in the future. I really love miniatures and haven't done quite as much with them lately as I'd like. Thank you for watching, my friends, and take care until next time.